welcome to Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast with Renae Hanvin, which is all about inspiring you to start thinking and doing disasters a little bit differently too. Welcome to the first episode of Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast. My name is Renae Hanvin, and I figured a pretty good place to start is to give you a little bit of an overview of myself. I'm really excited about this podcast. I've been planning it for a little while because it's where I'm going to get to talk with leaders in the emergency management and disaster resilience landscape to discuss what we can all start doing to contribute towards a disaster resilient future for all. Now, I started thinking differently and doing differently when it comes to disasters when I worked at Australia Post, which is an Australian national postal outlet. And basically, I led the community response to disasters, which basically was about identifying what role should Australia Post play. So, for example, should they be giving out government grants? Should they be giving out cash donations? Should they be offering their logistics supply chain to enable other organisations like bedding providers to give free beds and other items that the communities needed? As an organisation, I got to see what the response was in terms of a holistic approach to disasters. So how ready the Australia Post supply chain and operations were to respond to this incident. Plus also 80% of Australia Post businesses and retail outlets at the local community levels are independently owned or licensees. So small businesses provided a really good insight in terms of how ready they were and not were ready to respond to the disasters that took place. When I left Post, I spent a bit of time consulting to a state government in Australia, looking at a multi-stakeholder lens. So that's my passion, and I guess that's what makes me wake up in the morning. I look at stakeholders from a direct and indirect perspective, and I worked on a Victorian fire management strategy, which was really interesting and informative because we could not just look at the typical stakeholders that were part of all the conversations relating to fire management, but really expand that and look at all the consequence-related stakeholders that would indirectly be impacted as well. I wrote stakeholder engagement frameworks and toolkits to enable and try and educate the government representatives working in the disaster space as to how they could better understand and better engage with and collaborate with other stakeholders. This got me started questioning the national philosophy in Australia relating to shared responsibility when it comes to disasters, in the sense that everyone, individuals, businesses, not-for-profits, organisations and governments all play a role in the before, during and after stages of disasters, most importantly in building resilience. So I started questioning, what does this mean? What role can we each play? And how can we activate shared responsibility to be more than merely a vision? So at the start of 2018, I formally launched Corporate to Community. And I have to say there's about 3 years of planning and mapping and researching internationally before that. And the focus of Corporate to Community is about advocating and activating a greater role that the private sector or businesses can play. Because businesses are innovators, they're enablers, and through stakeholders, they drive solutions and positive outcomes. But in the current landscape of disasters, the business stakeholder group, I'd say, is pretty or misunderstood. And I think there's a really big opportunity to better understand and embrace and acknowledge the role that they can play. So my focus on doing disasters differently and the foundations for Corporate to Community is really simple. For us, it's about building resilient businesses, helping communities thrive, and leading collaborations. We need resilient and thriving businesses for communities, particularly in regional and rural remote areas, where small businesses are the economic heart and soul of communities. If we don't have thriving businesses in these communities, then there's no employment. People will have to move, either go somewhere else to purchase things, so there's no money being invested into the communities, or they'll actually have to leave to get a job so they can pay for their rent and family requirements. But we need thriving communities for business success, because businesses can't operate if there's no community able to purchase their products or services. So our foundation at Corporate to Community is that we really need to look at a multi-stakeholder approach in the sense of looking at building resilient businesses through organisational resilience, but also about investing in community resilience to enable our communities to thrive. The last part for corporate to community is about when we work together, we are stronger, and leading collaborations, because the foundation for resilience is connections. So the more we understand and invest in learning how to connect and how to collaborate better with each other, the much better the outcomes will be. I have a personal mission to drive all stakeholders to think differently and start doing differently when it comes to all hazards disasters. So I'm not just talking about natural disasters, because how we are living now, we have so many interdependencies and so many threats that we need to think about that can disrupt not only our businesses, but also our communities. We now live and work with more frequent and more destructive disasters, which are compounding, and we need to be thinking not only about the first impact from a disaster, but the second and the third, because that's what we're going to struggle with. And if you look at what's happening in the world at the start of 2020, or in Australia at least, not only have we had unprecedented bushfires after a drought, but we've also got a global pandemic. So how do our businesses and our communities prepare themselves for a drought or for a bushfire, but also a pandemic? And that's why we need to start thinking differently and acting differently when it comes to getting our organisations and our communities ready. A new era of disasters requires a new pathway forward, and I'm really excited to be able to share my connections from in Australia and around the globe so we can start building resilience together. That's the end of this episode of Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast, which I hope you found to be relevant, informative, and inspiring. If you're interested in participating in the conversation or to connect with me personally, please visit corporate2community.com. Until the next episode, stay safe, and remember, we all have a role to play in thinking differently and doing differently before, during, and after disasters.